This is for Palestine, Ramallah, West Bank, Gaza. This is for the child that is searching for an answer. Wish I could take your tears and replace them.
I'm going to open the floor to questions. I would just remind the brothers, ask questions. Alhamdulillah, the brother has come a long way. He's left behind a young family to try to be with us today. And all of you have come to hear what his opinion is. So if you can try to keep your questions short and concise, with a question at the end of it. If you do want to make a contribution, let me know beforehand, and I'm going to cut you off if you go beyond like 2 minutes. Okay, I'm going to take 3 questions that the brother can ask. So, brother here, brother Naveed, and brother here. So if you just give me the question, then you can ask.
Thank you so much for coming and sharing. For our non-Muslim friends who are sympathetic but don't have skin in the game, what is the one thing that you would recommend that we ask them to read or to watch to get to help them understand what we understand?
Okay, if you just bear that in mind, Naveed.
Yeah, my question was more about kind of future predictions and the PR side of things. There's been a general sentiment that Israel has kind of failed the PR battle and not really performed well on that front. We've seen some comical and YouTube videos or adverts and stuff like that. I wanted to see whether Brother Kareem agreed with that feeling that the PR side they failed, and whether there's going to be like a counter-attack on that side where they'll kind of improve their game on that side, and what can we expect in the next months and years on that side?
Okay, Jazakallah, and then the last question.
Okay, so isn't the only solution that would immediately and decisively for the moment stop the bloodshed the movement of the Muslim armed forces to physically protect the Palestinians, defend the defences? Is this not the only immediate solution that would indeed do this? And given this reality, mustn't our effort be concentrated towards this?
Okay.
So I'll go with this question here. Just remind me of the question, sorry.
So
the PR question.
Yeah, the kind of their framing of the discussion, their attempt to counteract the kind of genocidal narrative and say, look, this is,
So the Zionist movement has always been a very funny combination of top-heavy and granular. So it's granular in so far as it will get you fired from your job at a bakery for a tweet. It's top-heavy in that it concentrates on subjugating institutions. And so often, those granular moves are part of subjugating an institution. But the problem that they've never understood is that you don't, quote-unquote, win hearts and minds by subjugating institutions. Quite the opposite, you alienate more people with those type of assertions of power. And so I certainly don't see the pendulum swinging back in the other way. What I see as potentially happening in terms of people that are not in any way linked to part of the mechanisms which are fighting back and are defending the people of the region, actually, is that they will realize this is just hitting a brick wall, and because their political systems are so locked, they won't see a way beyond that. But I think in a PR sense, Israel's really its current tactic is through organizations like Solutions Not Sides, who try and couch everything in these universalisms and in these very broad strokes, kind of ambiguous statements like, we want to end the suffering. One I found hilarious recently was an individual who, he's an Israel lobbyist in the university sector, but he's one of the younger ones. He said, you can be unapologetically Zionist and also care deeply about Palestinian life. You actually can't. You actually can't. If you look at the history and the trajectory of the Zionist movement, there was 1 or 2 organizations. There was an individual by the name of Martin Buber who had an idea of spiritual Zionism, which was the peaceful immigration without violent colonialism. In the Zionist movement's history, he only had a couple of hundred followers at best. You had other examples, one of an organization which wanted to convert Palestinians to Judaism. That was their conception of Zionism. But the main strand of Zionism, which is certainly dominant today, is the Jabotinskyite Iron Wall Zionism, which is directly inspired by the fascism of Mussolini and others in Europe. Netanyahu's father was a very close confidant of Vladimir Jabotinsky, and this is the further point of that movement, essentially, that we're seeing today. So I think in a PR sense, they always have had a, because how can you sell to people mass displacement and genocide and industrial scale killing? How can you actually sell that to people as somehow serving the greater good? So yeah, I mean, I don't think this is a complete answer, but I think it could potentially, the book The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine by Ilan Pappé, if people want to use sort of the identity of the writer to somehow aid them in convincing another person. To be honest, at this stage, you look on the internet for 2 seconds and you're seeing a picture of children in situations that you would never believe you could see. To me, I think that should be more than enough to convince a person at this stage. If they're currently triangulating about what's happening, then I'm not sure that their heart's in the right place to begin with. In the case of what you're saying, is I would say that the organizations are there. The organizations are there. They are not all, most of them are not connected directly to a state institution of any kind. But if you look at the interviews with those leading those organizations, they will say where they have been aided and where they have been harmed. You frankly do have an axis of assistance in the region. When you have the Red Sea cut off from Israeli ships, but also ships and companies that have a history of transporting Israeli agents across the region to carry out assassinations, when you have that blockade being circumvented by a land bridge, which starts in the UAE, goes to Saudi and goes to Jordan, and then goes to the Zionist entity, you have an axis of assistance in the region. And so I think the more people, a lot of us in the English-speaking societies are very much in solidarity with the victimhood of Palestinians. But are we in solidarity with the other side of that equation? You know, I think the victimhood is endless, and we could spend a very long time talking about, thinking about, being concerned about the human suffering. But I think there's another side of the equation which bears looking at, which has things to be hopeful about.
Okay, excellent. Brother here, and then the brother at the back. And the sister at the back as well.
Question, I'll keep it as brief as I can. In an interview I watched recently, I saw 4 things come up. Why, in my head, classified as something but irreversible change. Right. Environment, BLM, racial equality, and gender equality. These are things over years have been pushed, and there's a fight. So you're going to have post-feminism, and you're going to have co-opting racial diversity, which is rubbish. But you're going to have people fighting that cause, and at some point, the legal points where it becomes irreversible. So those 3 things: environment, for me, the way I see it, definitely. BLM, racial equality, definitely. Gender equality, globally speaking, absolutely. This now, with what's happening in the US and so on, there's a big, I haven't seen that level, me personally, in a while. With those sort of metrics, doesn't matter where we are on the scale of irreversible, in your opinion, that thing against what I said, no realism, are we shifting slowly towards an irreversible thing? Ups and downs, yes, I agree, but irreversible.
So maybe answer that first.
So in my humble opinion, I think that the US police force has been militarized for the suppression of these exact type of things. And I think that more so than here, for example, you have a circumstance where the US will suppress these people. They will create industries of policing them. They will create industries of surveilling them, of infiltrating their movements and stuff like that. I do believe that people being willing to assert themselves physically in such a way is definitely illustrative of an interesting change. But I also think that, especially when it comes to the US style psyops, they are quite adept at producing lines which people then defend, which are not actually lines that are hugely consequential. So, for instance, if you're in a demonstration and the police say to people, well, you can't move from this particular side of the street, that will inevitably create a clash where there is asymmetric power that can then be responded to and crushed. And I think there are, while Goldsmiths has been an interesting example of a victory, where you saw at Brown University, for example, was not a victory, but had the PR of victory. So Brown University said, we will discuss our investments in organizations involved in Israel, at which point the students at Brown University said, okay, we'll disassemble our camp. But that's not a victory, right? But it has the PR of a victory, and it's a way that they're able to sort of assimilate some of this stuff. In my personal opinion, I think what happened in Turkey, for example, the regional changes, the involvement literally of a group in Bahrain, you're talking about where the US has its biggest naval base. These kind of things that are happening there in the region are more consequential than our hope in young Westerners to later affect change within the Western government, especially when you think that this is the declining side of US power. You know, the US, Britain has less of a role. Britain invaded and occupied Afghanistan 4 times in the last 2 centuries. Today, Britain has less of a say on the government in Afghanistan than Qatar and China do. Are we really to assume that the United States and its influence, especially, are we going to wait for these people to get old and then become the government in the US, and then the US government is going to change? I'm not hugely optimistic about that personally.
Okay, there's a brother in the chair.
Hi. I just want to raise 2 points. One of the points you raised about the balance of power changing the world. And the other one inviting the way forward. We find now today we're at a turning point where the West is in ideological, political and economic decline. And we've seen that Gaza has exposed that. Gaza has exposed the true nature of colonialism, and what's happening in the Middle East has exposed it to the whole world. America is so weak today and internally divided, and we see this across the West. Whether you look at Europe, whether you look at Britain, politically the protest is not just about Gaza. The protest against the establishment. We see that the establishment has exposed itself. And we can see this with the recent elections and way the Labour is failing, and everyone can see the true nature of the political party in this country. So the way forward for us is to further expose, really, the true nature of colonialism in the world. And we see that really other powers are rising, and these powers are weakening, and they know that. And so we see what's happening in Ukraine is destabilizing Europe, and Europe is going to now unravel. For America, it's going to be very, very difficult. So for us, what's the solution for us? The nation of state model has failed. We see the Sykes-Picot division of our countries has completely failed. And we see that how they have locked us down. Even though we have so many resources, we have armies on the border, but we can't move. Why is that? Because we are divided and locked down and shackled by this nation-state model. We need to unravel this, and we need to bring this down back. So we need to project for the youth the true.
Sorry, brother. Do you have a question? I think
yes. So the issue is for us. This was a discussion that he said we need to discuss how the way forward. The way forward is to inculcate, like the mentality in the minds of the people for how to bring Islam back. So we need to bring solutions.
Can we have a question? Because I've got another question.
Yeah.
Question. We need to bring solutions.
Okay.
What are the solutions? How do we bring those solutions?
The question is, do you have a solution?
Well, so what I would say is that the people fighting back are speaking. They're speaking to the cameras. They're giving interviews. They're telling people what they're doing. They're telling people what their aims are. They are achieving some really incredible feats. And I think that those are worthy of examination. I guess the role that we have from the colonial metropole of London is another question in all of that. But I think the movements within the region are leading the way.
Okay, there's a sister at the back, please.
How can we successfully challenge and change Western policies towards what's happening in Palestine when the government is actually controlled by powerful Zionist lobbies? They're very well organised, they're extremely well funded, and they control most of the media, such that if you see to Al Jazeera and listen to the BBC, they're talking about two completely different issues.
Well, I'm not advocating for involvement in the political process, though I would agree with disrupting the main political parties in the elections to come. But I don't think we will change policy here. I don't think we will change policy here. I think what we'll be able to do is win macro fights on the attritional war. So the macro fight could be simply at the school that your teenage relatives attend, being able to organize 300 parents to force out what is an Israeli behavioral change project being launched inside that school. I think that is really enough that a person could ask of you, really, in terms of where you are and your locality. Because as I say, Israel projects particular objectives within this country. And so there's ways in which we can organize against those.
Okay, I've been asked to repeat the question for the sister's answer, so I apologize, I haven't been doing so far. The question here. Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum, brother. First off, Jazakallah khair for your talk, and indeed for your voice online. Unfortunately, our minbars have fallen silent in these months, so it's refreshing to hear your voice on this subject.
Thank you.
My question would relate to the fact that we are gathered here in front of you in the masjid as Muslims, which is obviously the primary cause of why we feel retained in Gaza. As Muslims, we take from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala how to solve our issues and how to solve our problems. Your analysis of the problem was breathtaking, that's fantastic. The solution now comes onto the way in which we approach the deen of Islam and look to extract from it what we as Muslims must do to solve Gaza. And obviously Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His infinite wisdom knows best on how to solve it. And it becomes apparent from Islam that it is required for the Muslims, of the capable Muslims in Muslim lands, to stand forth and protect. Although, as we have seen, these very entities have served to increase the bloodshed and protect them as they have. But that doesn't change the fact that in Islam we are supposed to call upon them to do something and to strive to.
Well, you know I'm going to interrupt you.
My question is, should it not be the case that we as Muslims should strive and find out and work towards exactly how we can get these Muslim armies to move? Because day by day we're losing too much.
Yeah, but what I would say is that there are already people moving. And I think that looking at those particular structures and how those armies operate, you know, Egypt, for example, is the largest, after Israel, recipient of US military aid. What comes with that agreement? It comes with that agreement the protection of Israel. So really, if we're talking about the Egyptian military, it is more likely to intervene against the people of Gaza. You know, you have had some cases of people within the military that have been helpful to some extent. The case of Turkey, for example, while it's had all of this trade going on with Israel, it has launched some very important counterintelligence operations within Turkey that have revealed some of what Israel is doing to people that need to know that information. That kind of stuff can't be forgotten. So there's a nuanced picture, really. But I think, you know, with the case of Egypt, you're talking about the largest army in the immediate vicinity. You know, with the case of Jordan, what actually this recent period revealed is that its airspace is not its own. It would allow the British and even the Israelis to use its own airspace to do things. So, you know.
Would it not require someone to change leadership?
I'm sorry.
I would agree.
I'm going to go to brother here and then the brother there.
Is it, Michael, is it worth like getting politically organising? Because obviously the political framework has kind of jigged about new groups are forming new kind of brands of parties. Is it worth us doing it? Because it's clear that can't rely on that city can't. We've been using the Muslims and the mosques and that for years on end. You know, half our cast have gone, he's too busy looking up his property portfolio, looking up the LGBTQ, going after the EU, but he doesn't really care about us. So what can we do? Like, can we start a party ourselves, a political group?
So the question...
Everyone has been voting for City Count for years, I don't know why.
I mean, I wouldn't vote for it. Yeah, I wouldn't vote for it personally.
I was going to say, the question for the sisters answer is, should the Muslims get politically organised? Traditionally, voting for people like Sadiq Khan has not been for the benefit of the Muslims. So, what should we do?
Yeah, definitely politically organised. I would say look at an organisation like Palestine Action in the way that you could potentially assist. Look at where victories have been won. Study those victories. Don't study the defeats. Don't study the defeats. Study the victories. Learn about the individuals involved in them. Look at how those individuals came to be able to organise as part of the wider collective, and then work out ways you can apply it according to your own context. So the context where you are, in Tamworth, for example, until Palestine Action came along and said, look, there's this Israeli arms company, the community didn't know. In the case of Shenstone, for example, got the UAV engines that Israel uses in the Elbit Systems drones, produced in this country. This is a new realization that people have had. So you can spend your time, with all due respect, boycotting dates next to a factory that's making weapons for the Israelis. You could be driving a cab for someone into that factory, for example, while boycotting dates and boycotting Coca-Cola. That factory is part of that war machine. It's a legitimate target. It is also a place that is harder for them to morally and legally defend. So I think it's about analysing the specific context that you exist in and what's close to you locally.
And brothers and sisters, in terms of Palestine Action, so this is one of the most principled and courageous organizations we have in the country. And it doesn't get nearly enough publicity and support for the action it does. I'm telling you as a lawyer who deals with some of these cases, you're trying to stop the British government selling weapons to Israel. So there's been an expedited hearing. Like they realized the urgency of this case, so they said, we need to hear this urgently. So they've listed it for when? October. Okay, that's the urgency. So until October, carry on slaughtering as many Palestinians as you wish. It takes a long time, it's technical, and more often than not, we lose in these cases. What Palestine Action do is just take direct action. They're willing to go to prison for what they believe in. They're smashing up these factories, vandalizing them, making them operationally dysfunctional until they shut them down. I think in 12 months, it's 3 factories have been shut down.
Not 12 months, it's 2 to 3 years. There's been 2 factories, 2 subsidiaries sold, 1 head office shut down, £280 million worth of contracts cancelled, contracts with organisations associated to Elbit Systems cancelled. Its recruitment organisation, IO Associates, which was the only recruiter that it had. Its key logistics company, one of the few that have the right to move military hardware throughout the country, cancelled their contract. So in a way, it's in tandem with the pressure from Palestine Action, but it's also the scenes that people see in Gaza is affecting.
So this is absolutely critical that this group is supported. There's going to be a bucket going around. There'll be one at the back as well as one at the front. Please donate whatever you can, because if we ourselves are not willing to sacrifice, willing to take the risk of going to prison for the sake of our brothers and sisters, and there are a group of people who are willing to make that sacrifice, then it's the minimum we can do is to actually support them politically, financially, whatever we can do. So please, the buckets are going around. Please donate whatever you can, inshallah. We know it's not Ramadan, but please carry on the habit of Ramadan in this month, and please give whatever you can, inshallah. So, Ishad, do you bring the book? Yeah, so just as it's coming around, please just donate what you can. Brother Dean, and then Brother here.
So my question is related to the NHS. So within healthcare, there's huge witch hunt going on, trying to, it's led by lots of European organisations, where they look for social media tweets or statements in support of Palestine, and they weaponise the regulatory processes like the German Medical Council, practitioner fitness practice processes, and they basically silence healthcare professionals down by saying that the anti-Semitic, the Jewish patient wouldn't feel comfortable. This is against the principles of, it's being kind to patients. And the net result is that healthcare professionals are completely intimidated in science, because when they go into this process, they go by themselves, they don't go into the law. And they have to be explained something they've said or something they've done. So there's a complete silencing due to this intimidation. What's your advice about how people who feel Palestine in these sectors can navigate it? Because they have to a higher standard than normal public and police sector.
So the recent case that was won by Rahman Low solicitors, the case of David Miller at Bristol University, it found that to be fired for being an anti-Zionist was discrimination as per the Equality Act of 2010. So if a person believes that they have a case along those lines, that they've been discriminated against because of their anti-Zionist views. So anti-Zionism is essentially a protected view off the back of that case. They should talk to Rahman Low solicitors. They should look for ways in which they can challenge that legally, because now they have a stronger footing than before.
If you speak a bit louder to the mic,
So, okay, yeah, so now they have a stronger footing than before because of that Miller versus Bristol University case.
Brother here?
Yes. South Africa is taking actions against its citizens who've gone out to fight in Palestine. I think there was talk of France doing the same. What's happening to the citizens who've gone out to Palestine and are fighting, posting TikTok videos, gloating about what they're doing? What's happening on that front?
I think Brother Fahad would be far better positioned to answer that question.
I mean, you can ask me any time, but I think they prefer your perspective. He's asking for the sister's answer. The question is, what's happening to the British citizens who are going to travel to Israel and getting involved with the IDF, committing atrocities, and then coming back? I mean, to answer the question, nothing is happening. South Africa have made a statement they're going to prosecute. France have made a declaration. Nothing's happened yet. But in this country, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner was on Ferrari when this first came about, when the complaint was made to the War Crimes Unit. And he pretty much summed it up, said, look, not much is going to happen. We're a very busy unit, and this is not going to take up much of our time. There's been complaints being made with that War Crimes Unit for the past 5-6 years. Nothing's happened. So I think the pressure has to come politically to make it untenable. This government, and I think Dr. Craig will agree with me, is that things only change when the wind starts changing. So when people see politically that Zionism is something you cannot proudly say, I'm a Zionist. Right now, there's still people who will say, we are Zionists, we were in the IDF. As you said, they're gloating. They're coming giving talks publicly. But a lot of those talks have been shut down because of the efforts of activists who've gone around to those places and lobby to make sure that those talks don't happen openly. They're happening behind closed doors now. So we can't give them the space to think that this is okay. And only politically when we start doing that, I don't think we should have much faith in the institutions, whether it's the ICC, the ICJ. These are tools, we utilize whatever's at our disposal, but the efforts are going to come from grassroots, what we want to do. I mean, make these people pariahs, wherever they are. If you find out that someone on a school governing board was a member, went out and fought in Israel, you bring the school, you bring your kids out, you protest. That's really how I think change is going to happen. We can't rely on the Metropolitan Police. Unfortunately, that's not going to happen.
I think there was a rabbi who sort of went out there, and I think in one of the universities, he was actually working for the IDF, and direct action actually stopped him sort of, propagating.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the demands in the campus occupation in Leeds at the moment. That's one of their demands is with this guy.
I think one of the quite dangerous things about the Israeli occupation forces and the way that they function is they have a mechanism called lone soldiers, whereby even if you are not a citizen, there are several organizations through which you can serve and fight in the military for 14 to 18 months and then go back into the society and never have citizenship. So up to 7,000 people within the Israeli military today are not even citizens of Israel. So it's actually quite difficult to ascertain what they've been doing for this time if you are another government. The other thing that they've made use of in Gaza recently is mercenary groups. In one case, Forward Observations Group has been fighting in Ukraine for the Nazi Azov battalion, and they are now fighting with the Israeli military against the Palestinians in Gaza. So it's a real laboratory for experimentation with controlling people and systematizing killing.
Okay, there's a question for the Yasin, and then the sister at the back whose hand is up as well.
Mine was a lot like Brother Shuja's. I mean, you know, that if we have a movement where we can expose British citizens that are soldiers as well, that's something that could be done. Find them, ostracize them, make them, you know, publish their names and addresses.
Yeah. Again, I think that's being done by various people. I think I've seen a lot of documents have been put out on the internet, but I think collectively the issue is what was identified is that there's one aspect of reporting these people to the police, but also, as you said, essentially doxing them and putting up the detail, but then finding out what position of influence they have in society, and then rallying and mobilizing around that to out them, to take them out, to make sure. I mean, essentially, in reverse, what they're doing to us, where you putting a poster in Palestine, and you're being reported to the GMC, the SRA, the BSB, to your regulator, to your employer, for very innocuous posts on Palestine or in support of resistance. And then on the flip side, you have people, you know, joining the IDF and getting involved in all sorts of atrocities, and then, you know, carrying on with their life. So I agree with you. There has to be some sort of balance. I'm just going to ask the sister at the back the question.
I have a question about student encampments. What advice would you give students who want to join those encampments, and how can we support them, and how effective do you think we're getting?
So a question on the student encampments on campus at the moment, how effective they'll be, how any advice for people involved in them, and how others can support them.
Well, in terms of their efficacy, I would probably be a little bit more reserved in my judgment. However, the recent victory at Goldsmiths is interesting. Brother Fahad, if you wanted to maybe run down what some of the victories at Goldsmiths have been, that might be quite interesting, just so we understand that something has been achieved in one of these contexts. But again, it will differ from university to university on what the exact dynamics at play are.
So in Goldsmith University, there was been 5 months of campaigning, including a 5-week encampment. They've been constantly lobbying the authorities there, and they achieved 6 points. I mean, I'll go through what they've achieved. For me, it was a huge success. And Goldsmith is known as a Zionist university, so it's quite important that they got this victory there. It gives you hope for other places. So some of the victories that they achieved were the demands they had, which were met by the university, was giving scholarships for Palestinian students, renaming a lecture hall after the killed journalist Shireen Abu Akleh, adopting a new ethical investment policy and a review of the pension fund, a statement condemning the genocide in Gaza, and a review of the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which is very controversial because it equates criticism of Zionism in Israel with anti-Semitism. So they're going to review their adoption of that definition. That's a definition that is incredibly problematic and is used to get people into all sorts of problems with their employers. So it's a huge success in terms of Goldsmiths. Whether that can be replicated across the board, I think it would be fantastic if we can. Okay, who has another question? So we've got there.
You mentioned there will be 3 wars. This will actually start. Once you say this, this country will be war. And the second question is, what's stopping Russia and China from sending arms to Palestine?
Okay, so
British can send planes to Ukraine so fast. What does Russia and China have to do?
So the question is, why are Russia and China, what's stopping them from sending arms or weapons to the Palestinians? And number two, you mentioned there was 3 wars that were going to take place. What these wars are?
Well, I mean, okay, I'll start with the war question. So, if you are governing a society that has been established in occupied Palestine, the Zionist entity, there's only so long that you can maintain the credibility to rule the society without going into Lebanon. Because what you have is the paralysis of the north. You have over 100,000 people since October, mid-October, have been in hostels, in hotels, in the center of the Zionist entity, and they are being kept there because of fear of strikes coming from South Lebanon. So Israel has to, and it's an existential thing, it has to try and rid Lebanon of Hezbollah. And again, that's almost an impossible objective. The problem with Zionism is so much of it, it's like trying to fit a circle in a square. It can't be achieved. You're trying to depopulate the country of Palestinians. Can't be achieved. You're going to try and completely alter Lebanon. It will not be achievable, but they will have to try it. The other war will be over Al-Aqsa, and it depends on the response that comes from Muslims of when Israel attempt to do that. And then the other war will be with Iran, without a shadow of a doubt. That's my personal view. Just because of the extent to which Israel is being harmed by those 2 particular forces that I'm talking about, and the extent to the centrality of this idea of the temple being rebuilt by Israel, this is a key part of the Zionist trajectory. What was the other question?
Russia and China, why don't they support?
So according to the Israelis claim they found Chinese weapons in Gaza. Those, without a doubt, wouldn't have come directly from the Chinese government. They may have somehow got through Egypt from other forces. The resistance in Gaza, as I say they were given the license to produce things locally from the Russians. You can't hold great hope for these 2 big states to directly do that vis-a-vis Gaza. But if you actually look at the resistance factions and who has been arming and training them for decades and spending billions on them for decades, and that's not my word, that's Ziad Nakhala, Talal Naji, Ismail Haniya. Look at any of the interviews with these individuals and they will say very clearly who has funded, trained and empowered them to the point of being able to produce their own means. Then you will arrive at one particular state within the region. And if you look at the relationship of that particular state with those particular 2 states that you mentioned, then you have a little bit more of a picture of the equation that is developing. It's obviously far from being enough, but it's significant.
There's a question here.
Yeah. Like you just said, Zionism is trying to fit a circle into a square. This is exactly what they are doing. But the new definition of Zionism is to recognize the right of Israel to exist. That's the new definition of Zionism now. And on the radio they say that all the politicians that recognize the right of Israel to exist is a Zionist. So how can we stop that?
I mean, just because they create that equation, it doesn't mean we have to obey
Not for the competition, but for the whole, for the public, for everybody.
Well, it exists through the assertion of force and violence. For example, in this country, London was founded as Londinium, as a military base for the Romans. Would anyone say that that would give the right of a modern-day Italian to come and force anyone in this room out of their home? They wouldn't. So what you're asking people to do is sort of humour at the point of a gun somebody else's illusions about the relationship between the past and the present. I don't think we necessarily have to be hostage to what you've just said.
But recognizing the right, the Israeli right to this, which means that they have a free hand to kill as many Palestinians as they can.
Okay, just someone who hasn't asked a question yet. Brother at the back with the kafir, the white.
What do you think about Saudi Arabian attempts to achieve Palestinian status through normalization? And also, do you think that Israel is gunning for regime change in Iran with like covert support of the West so they can establish themselves in the world?
So the first question was about Saudi Arabia trying to establish Palestinian statehood through normalization. And the second was about whether Israel is trying to destabilize or make regime change in Iran.
I mean, it's not a question of whether they are or they're not. They have been assassinating civilian nuclear scientists. They've been running operations within the country.
Why deploy that community with the West?
Absolutely, that's a simple fact. I mean, in terms of the Saudi aspect of what we're talking about, I'm of the belief that normalization has happened. It's actually a clever PR trick to say it hasn't, because when a state outsources the functions of its security services in the way that is required through the NSO group and the use of Pegasus on Jamal Khashoggi's phone. Saudi was hacking the phone of Jamal Khashoggi before they killed him. Israel has access to everything the NSO group gathers. That's the integration is there. The Celebrite example, for example, of a Saudi citizen. So normalization has happened. It's just a matter of degrees. It's just a matter of what is there for public consumption. And you can see it by the policies that are being carried out during this genocide.
So it's not, you don't think it's going to be a viable route for Palestinian statehood?
I mean, Palestinian statehood means nothing. You're talking about an area that they are saying 22% of Palestine, that's full of settlements, where Israel controls what comes in, what comes out. Israel controls. You know, this is why the telecommunications companies and the way they developed post-Oslo is very, very interesting, because the Palestinian Communications Ministry literally operates under the auspices of the Israelis. They build where the Israelis say they can. They provide full access to the Israelis. The project of Palestinian statehood, as pushed by the Palestinian Authority, is literally a subterfuge for increased Zionist colonization, and always has been. Yes, it creates a wafer-thin, small, careerist class of comprador traitors who kill their own people in order to ingratiate themselves with Zionist overlords. But it's nothing more and nothing less, you know. People can give nice speeches and interviews, but actually what they are part of is the reality of the situation.
Okay, I think we'll just take 3 more questions. The brother at the back had his hand for a while, the purple hoodie.
I've spoken to many pro-Israeli people online and in person, and unfortunately very little success. So my question to you, I've seen you obviously on Piers Morgan and many other trying to convince people, is what is the advice when talking to these people, and do you think it can be successful?
The question is, what advice you'd give to speaking to pro-Israeli supporters, and can it be successful?
The circumstances will convince them. The circumstances which will come will convince them. As Thomas Paine said, time converts more than reason. We are not that consequential for us to sit there and convince someone out of a whole lifetime of indoctrination. But as I say, those people that have been driven out of the north, they're not going back to the north for the moment. And there's a reason they're not going back to the north. I think sometimes existing in this society, we can get taken in by some of the liberal ideas that say, oh, you know, dialogue and there's a way that we can convince someone of our view and it can change an existing investment that they have. It's not going to. The equation on the ground is what's going to change that ultimately, in my opinion.
Because the last two questions got Brother Naveed.
Yeah, forgive me for the bonus question, brother, because you mentioned Aqsa quite a few times. I think it might be relevant. There's much increase in visits to Aqsa, particularly from Western Muslims, because they have the money and the means and so forth. I'm not necessarily talking from a religious perspective, because of course Aqsa has a place, but from a strategic point of view, do you think the large groups of Muslim pilgrims going from the West to Aqsa is a help or a hindrance?
The question is whether strategically there's large groups of Muslims from the West coming to Al-Aqsa. Does that help the Palestinians or does it cause a hindrance?
I don't think I'm qualified to give, there are people who are qualified who have given positions, and there are different positions. And I think those are worth looking at more closely. But I couldn't say to somebody they should or shouldn't take that step. But there are schools of thought on it. There are some that view it as, to some extent, an admission of Israeli dominance over the area, because you would have to pass through. For instance, an Israeli soldier who's fresh from Brooklyn may ask you to recite Surah Al-Fatiha to prove that you're a Muslim to enter Al-Aqsa. There are those that would say this is a form of normalization, for example. I can respect that position. There are those that would say you have to do it while you can. You have to go and support Murabatun Bil Aqsa in any way that you can. That's also a position that I would have respect for too. So I can't really say definitively my view on that.
Okay, so Maghrib is in about 10 minutes, so I'll just do one last question. And then from the kids, are you?
What's your personal opinion on Iran's missile attacks on Israel?
What's your personal opinion on Iran's missile attacks on Israel?
Well, this entrapment. I think Israel being in a position where the Iron Dome is unable to effectively protect it from ballistic missiles shot from several countries away, I think the requirement of direct British, French and US intervention in one night worth over £1 billion, and also the striking of these strategic military locations which have had a key role, one of them in the war in Gaza and another one in the strike that took place on the consulate. These are definitely significant, and I think anyone that's looking at it in terms of sort of geopolitics would say this is an interesting change.
So I think we'll wrap up. I just have one, on the chair, so I'll give the last question. A lot of people, maybe in this room and probably you've met on your travels, have got themselves in difficulty with their employers, their regulators, their universities, because of their stance on Palestine. What kind of advice can you give them in terms of how to deal with that and in terms of generally sort of the well-being?
To be honest, I think I'm more fortunate than most people in that regard, partly because of visibility. So when I've been in those situations, I've had more protections than the vast majority of people do have. I think, though, as a principle which can be applied and has been proven to succeed, you cannot capitulate and behave as if the intervention is coming from a good faith place. As soon as you do that, you've lost. As soon as you issue a statement of apology, whatever you're being accused of, as soon as you issue a statement of apology, you will lose. That is not protection, and it's important to keep that in mind. In the case that the brother spoke about with the NHS, I think it's important to look at the Miller-Bristol case, because there is a legal precedent which you can use to support you against this idea of being dismissed or sanctioned in some way for having anti-Zionist views. So I think, it's worth getting someone like Fahad involved or Rahman Low, solicitors, individuals and organizations that have a well-documented and proven history of fighting these cases and winning. As long as you're isolated and you're on your own, you're weak. So collect the violence, get with others that have won previously, and fight it. If you don't fight, you won't win. If you fight, you might not win, but the only way you will win is if you fight. In that case, I would say.
Jazakallah khair. I mean, thank you.
And Cage, yeah, absolutely. And you know, what can be said about the fantastic work that Cage have done for decades now, supporting people in a myriad of ways. So definitely look to Cage as well. And look to others, like I say, that have succeeded in these situations.
So I know that Brother Kareem has been here for quite a long time now, and he, as I said before, he's got a young family he's left behind. So really, really grateful for you taking that time out and coming to us. It's come a long way. So please give a big takbir for Lowkey, Kareem. Takbir! Takbir! Takbir!
Thank you.
سبيل الدموع سبيل مريح تنهدى